Okay, good morning to everyone. Today we are going to complete the course with the 10th subject, and the subject is about risk management. So, what's the origin of risk management? The origin of risk management is no matter how well you prepare for any project or any task, always will think go not exactly as your plan. So when it doesn't go exactly as your plan, then what happens is that you need to have a plan for uh, making sure that if those risks happens, how will you overcome those challenges and those risks? So the whole concept of risk management came from there. So the first slide is about so what do we learn in risk management? And these are gold standard again. We learn these elements which are as per the Australian qualification, and these are also as per the global standard. So the first thing that we learn how to identify risks. Now when someone gives you a project, you know there are certain risks, but you don't know how entire possibilities of all the risks. So if you plan for something to be mitigated but another kind of risk come, obviously that means you are not well prepared. So therefore the first element we learn is about how to identify risk. The second element is once you have identified the risk, how to analyze the risk, because if the risk is very insignificant, then you might just say I don't care. But if the risk is quite significant, then after analysis you will say I need to do something about that, or I need to be prepared for it. So that's the second element we learn. The third element is once we know the risks are, say, very high risk or medium risks, we need to have a plan or a strategy. How do we mitigate or treat those risks so that we are virtually risk free or very low level of risk? The fourth element is after we have incorporated all our strategies to keep the risks low, we need to continuously monitor and continuously control those risks while the execution is taking place so that we ensure that nothing goes beyond our planned boundaries and the project is very much in control of the project manager. So that's how we need to know how to monitor and how to control the risks. And of course, there is always a continuous improvement function, and therefore the last one is to assess the risk management outcome. That means you as a project manager had a strategy for risk management, and you will assess whether your strategies worked for this project and what have you learned from this project that you can take it to the next project, and what you think were the challenges that were still unresolved, and therefore based on your assessment you'll have a plan of how to have your next risk management plan. So if you take care of all these five elements, that means you have known about the risk management and you're competent about the risk management. Okay, so first thing we start with, so therefore what is risk? Now risk is basically possibility of something bad that can happen to your project. Okay, this is a situation which involves very high level of exposure to any danger. Okay, so you will essentially categorize those events or possibilities as risk that you think will impact your project. Anything that is not going to impact your project is not a risk. It could be just a reality. For example, suppose a person is handicapped. Okay, person cannot run very strongly because of some knee problem or some disabilities. Okay, now since you can't do anything about it, it becomes a reality. It is not categorized as a risk. So anything which is inherent and nothing can be done about it, you don't call that a problem, you call that as a reality. So you must understand the difference between what is reality versus what is a risk. Risk means something you can do. There's a possibility of bad happening, danger happening. You can do something about it. Only then you will categorize that as a risk. And the last thing that we want to understand our risk, that it is a future possibility. It is not something that is now in our hand. Anything which is now in our hand is not a risk. It is called an issue. You have a challenge which is reality today. The risk is something which is in future, and therefore the risk can happen or may not happen. For example, I'm crossing the road. I might get hit by a car. Okay, so that's a possibility. If it does not happen, it is not a risk. Okay, but if it happens, then it is not a risk anymore. A risk has been fructified, and therefore it becomes an event or an issue or a challenge that I have to deal with. Clear? Okay. So now that we know about it, what is risk? The first thing that we talked about, therefore, which are the risk areas? Now, the good news is we have already learned about 10 areas in project management that the project manager will always keep an eye on. So those are scope, time, cost, quality, human resource, procurement, communication, integration, and stakeholder, plus the risk. But because we are discussing risk today, so there are 9 left. So the risk can happen in any of the 9 areas. So the first thing is, when you're trying to identify risk, you will identify risk in each of these areas, and you will create a book for yourself. For example, what could be the risk in scope management? The scope management, the risk could be that you have decided to do X, and then suddenly your sponsor, the client, or end users is saying, no, we wanted X plus something. So that is called a scope creep. So that means there is a problem with the scope and there's a risk of the scope. What is the risk? How it can impact your project? Because if the scope increases, obviously the time will increase, the cost will increase. So it's a risk. It will impact your project. Similarly, in the time area, that means maintaining the schedule, you will identify what could be the risks. For example, there could be disruptions during the project period, which could be maybe bad weather, there could be political unrest, there could be COVID and lockdown, there could be anything, and therefore there could be disruptions. So you have to identify what possible risk events can happen that will derail your project in terms of time management. So that exactly that way you will identify risk in each of the 9 elements. For example, human resource. What are the risks in human resource? That the people who are going to work for you, suddenly they fall sick, or suddenly they get a better job and then leave you. And someone who is very valuable to you, halfway in the project, that person leaves, it's a risk for you. So you need to plan what happens if someone leaves from your team. Okay, so that's a risk. So now that we have identified where do we look for the risk and how do we create the risk management framework. The next one will be therefore the framework itself. The framework is an ISO framework which you need to always follow, and the ISO framework in Australia and New Zealand standard, it's called 31000 of 2009. It hasn't changed since then, and there is a link over there, or you can just Google search 31000 ISO 31000 risk management framework, risk management standard. You can read it. It's a couple of pages, very easy reading. You can read everything in much great details to understand what the framework talks about. Now I'm going to give you this one slide to capture the entire risk management framework, and that is basically a framework which is called plan, do, check, and act. Okay, so plan, do, check, and act. So basically you're supposed to plan for the risk management, carry out and execute that plan, and keep checking the monitoring, controlling that I talked about, and then act to reduce the risk. And then this is a continuous process. Again, you do the same thing over and over again. So the process that you follow in the risk management framework, which is ISO standard, is that define the risk in the context. I gave you the example of the context of the risk is I'm crossing a road. Okay, so I'm defining the risk in the context of Now, the road could be a by-lane, a small lane, or the road could be a highway. Okay, you can see it's a small lane in your neighborhood. The risk in that context is much less because less traffic, it's a small road, quickly you can cross, the risk is less. But suppose you are trying to cross a highway which cars are traveling at 90 kilometers, 100 kilometers an hour, the context itself will change the same situation of crossing a road to a very low risk to a very high level of risk. Okay, so therefore, first you define the context, then you identify what could be risk there. In this case, the risk could be of running over, the car not seeing you, you not seeing the car, or you are, suddenly you trip in between while you're crossing the road. So that's you need to identify the kind of risk, and then you analyze the risk, which we'll see today. How do we analyze? And then we evaluate, and then after analysis and evaluation, we treat or we mitigate the risk and then review whether we have done it well. Okay, so this in one slide is the framework, the ISO 31000 framework of plan, do, check, and act. Now, this is a good one to remember because in the interviews, in any job, or if your bosses are asking you, you have gone through a course on risk management, what have you learned? So you can say, I've learned the risk management framework called ISO 31000, and they might ask you what the framework talks about, and you can say the framework talks about plan, do, check, and act. The framework is plan, do, check, and act. Okay, and it's a continuous process. So that means you have done well, you have learned well. So now let's see the first step. We talked about first step is to identify the risk. I hope everyone can see my slides. Can you see my slides? Okay, and my cursor? Can you see the cursor? Yes, thumbs up. Okay, good. Okay, so first is to identify the risk. Now, it's a very simple process till I tell you how to identify. If someone, your boss comes and tells you tomorrow, please give me a complete identification of all the risk, without me telling you, you'll say, oh, I don't know where to start. Okay, but once I tell you the next slide, you will say how easy it is. So I normally tend to keep it very easy. So the next slide talks about how to identify. It's very simple. You have certain methods. The first is a meeting method. That means you meet with the experts. Now these are called WHS experts, which is work health and safety experts. Okay, they're also called safety officer. In large project there are safety officers. Okay, they are trained in risk management. So all that you do is go and have meeting with them and say, look, you are an expert, this is my project. In the project, what kind of risk I might face that I have to put in a register and plan for mitigating, and they will tell you a whole lot of list very quickly. So the first is setting up meeting. The second one is engage with the risk management representatives, either the safety officers or they are representatives who are expert or experienced in risk management, so you can engage with them. The third one is another easy one where you all brainstorm. I gave you the example of, suppose you're planning for a holiday or planning for a picnic. So what you do is you all sit down together and you brainstorm, okay, what can go wrong? Someone will say, oh, we may just forget the food or the dessert. Someone might say we just forget the cricket ball and bat that we are going to plan. So when you brainstorm with people, everyone can think and everyone can tell you something, and you record all the lists, and that's how a brainstorm gives you quite an exhaustive possibilities. As I told you, risk is possibilities of something going bad in your project, and say in this case the project was going on a picnic. The other simple tool that we use is SWOT analysis, which is strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat. When you do a SWOT analysis, all the weaknesses, all the threats basically tells you what could be a possible risk in your project. The other one, which is a little advanced, is called scenario planning. So this is like a war game. So suppose Russia and Ukraine is going on the war currently. So the war game, everyone, the war generals will sit down and then will create different scenarios. The scenario is that Kiev will be attacked from east or west, okay, or they will say the scenario could be that they will be having aerial bombardment, okay. So like that, different scenarios you create, and for each of the scenario you create the possible risk that you're not prepared. For example, if I know they're going to come from the west bank of a river, the enemy is going to come, then obviously with that scenario, I know exactly what I need to do. I will guard all the west bank, I'll guard the bridge. So in the scenario, I will be able to identify the possible risks, and therefore I'll be able to plan and stop those ones. So scenario planning is a little advanced technique, but it's a good one to create in a war game situation. And of course, the last but not the least is the consult the standards and the legislation. The standards and legislation gives you what you need to do. So there are people standard. For example, if you're supposed to pay certain wage, give some holidays, don't allow staff to be fatigued, these are written in the people standard. In Australia, there are fair work, okay. So that's a legislation, fair work act. So that standards will tell you these are the things you need to follow as a project manager. If you don't follow, you run risk, someone will take you to the court. Okay, so this is a good one slide for you to use when you're starting your planning to do the risk, identify the risk. The next one, you need to know that all the risk through the brainstorming, scenario planning that you have done, you have to put into different categories. So there are 17 categories I've given here. In real life, there could be 28 to 30 categories, depending on what kind of projects you're doing. So you need to put each of the risk into different categories. So communication related risk will be all in the communication basket. Finance related risk will be in the finance basket. Physical injury that can happen as a risk, you will put in the physical bracket in the box. Now, this is an important competency that you need to have as a project manager. Why? Because the expertise for communication is very different from the expertise of the legal risks. For the legal risk, you will go to the legal department and get their advice to mitigate the risk, whereas you might go to the communication expert for communication and human resource expert for the human resource related risk. So therefore, risk categorization is a very important task the project manager does after identification of all the risks. Normally, there will be not dozens, but hundreds of possible risks. Now, remember, more the number of risks you have identified through one of the processes in the previous slide, better you are prepared for any eventualities, and therefore your risk management is so robust that your project does not get impacted with any possibilities or probabilities in the future. Okay, for example, technology. If the technology says that something will go wrong in the Zoom meeting, something will go wrong in your data access and data processing, data storage, obviously you will put all those risks under technology, and you'll hire an IT person. So what we have learned now is basically it's not only the identification of the risk, but we have learned that the risk categorization is very important for a project manager. Once we have done that, then we go to the next stage of competency, which is the analysis of the risk. Why do we need to analyze? Because I gave you the example of crossing the road. Crossing the road in front of your home in a neighborhood small lane has your analysis will say the risk of crossing the road is much lower as against trying to cross a road which is a highway where the traffic are going into high speed at 100 kilometers. So analysis of the risk is done by using a formula. Now this is a universal formula that you use. Whole world uses this, and you will be learning it today. It's called a simple formula called, we need to rate the risk. Each risk we need to rate with a number or a category or a nomenclature. And that formula is basically the likelihood multiplied by the consequences. So what is the likelihood that COVID will happen to you or your staff member? What is the likelihood? Is it 100%? Is it 10%? Or is 50%? What is the likelihood? What is the probability? And the second one is, what is the consequence or the impact if that happens to your project? So for example, if all your staff member gets, a majority of the staff member gets COVID, then the consequences are very, very severe to your project, because all those people will be out of the project for 2 weeks. How will you run your project in that case? Okay, so that way you use this formula called likelihood multiplied by consequence. So we'll take an example for that. So the first one is, how do you ascertain the likelihood? So you use this table. In this table, you will see the likelihood you've categorized into 4 categories or 4 levels of likelihood. Very rare, it can happen. It is unlikely it will happen. Occasionally it can happen. It's quite likely it can happen, and almost certain it will happen. Okay. So I've given an example of COVID. What is the likelihood of getting COVID if everyone comes to the office without a mask? So then you will see that it's almost certain today or tomorrow during the COVID period, someone will get COVID. So therefore you will see the risk called COVID here. You put a level 5. That means the likelihood is level 5. Let's take another example, cash flow. Okay, so what is the possibility of cash? You're running out of cash in the project. You have planned, but your sponsor might delay your payments, or your agreement or negotiation has been quite not up to the standard, and therefore you can have a cash flow issue. But you will say, but I have taken care of through my contract, and therefore it is not rare, but it is unlikely. So you will put cash flow here. Okay, the third risk is a staff leaving. So you might say, yeah, it is not rare, it is not likely. I know my staff are very good. They might get another job. And then occasionally they might leave. Occasionally I might experience my staff leaving my company. Okay, it's not that almost certain, it is not likely they will leave, but occasionally they can leave. So you will put it occasionally. Similarly, bad weather in a project, you can say, oh, it's a rainy season. I'm quite sure there will be rains and disruptions. So it's quite likely there will be weather disruptions. So I'll plan for it. So I'll keep extra days. So the first thing is, I've taken 4 examples for you to put very simplistically through your team and through your own understanding, through your experts. You will put those risks into the likelihood categories. Likelihood, remember, is the probability of that risk occurring in future. So probability could be rare, or probability could be almost certain it will happen. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step of the formula, we talk about the consequences. That means if the risk happens, what is the consequence or what is the impact of that in my project? So again, there are 5 levels, being if that happens. For example, if there's a wet floor, I'm going to the supermarket, there's a risk of slip or trip. Even if the risk happens, slip or trip, I will just fall, nothing will happen. I'll get up, I'll dirty my clothes, but that's fine. So you will see the consequence will be insignificant. Whereas in the case of COVID, you might just say, if the COVID happened, I will categorize that either as major or as catastrophic, because if 1 or 2 people get COVID in my project, it's a major disruption for me because they are experts. So I'll categorize them as major. Similarly, cash flow, it may not happen, but if it happens, it's a catastrophic effect, because without the cash, how do I pay the salaries? How do I buy the equipment? My project will stop, and therefore I will categorize cash flow, impact of cash flow being catastrophic or extreme in my project. Similarly, if the staff leaving, I can say, yeah, moderate, because I will get impacted, but maybe I will try and hire someone, and in the meanwhile I'll allocate the task to another staff member, or I'll do something, maybe I'll give them overtime. So therefore the consequence is going to be somewhere in the middle. So you will put that as a moderate in the middle. And similarly, if it is bad weather, you might just say the effect is minor because I've already planned for a certain number of days of disruption due to rain, storm, or whatever extreme heat. In the Middle East, they always keep a couple of days in the summer for extreme heat. So you can say minor. So in the formula of likelihood and consequences, we have now identified the same risks into two different categories, two different ways. We have ascertained the likelihood, which is the probability of happening, and the consequence of happening. Now you merge the two. In the next slide, we have combined the two. So it's a 5x5 matrix. And the 5x5 matrix, we have put likelihood as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and consequences 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like any other X and Y axis. And then in that, you will put in the right box. So you will remember the COVID, we said the possibility is almost certain that COVID will happen if we don't take care of the masks or the hand wash and everything. And if that happens, it becomes major. So you will put it here. Okay. Similarly, in the bad weather, we said it's likely, not certain, but the impact is going to be minor. So you will put it in this box. Similarly, for the staff leaving, you can say, yeah, occasionally the staff will leave, and if it happens, it'll have moderate impact in my project. So it'll come under occasion and under moderate here. And the last one, we have taken cash flow. We said the cash flow is unlikely to happen, cash flow issues, but if it happens, it's catastrophic because your project will stop. So you will put under unlikely, but under catastrophic. Now we have mapped by combining the formula, which is likelihood and consequences. Once we have that, this is not sufficient, because now we have to rate the risk by giving certain numbers or giving certain names. And that is why this box in the next slide will be the final framework, which is called the risk rating framework, in which we say if it is low, that is rare is also 1, insignificant is 1. If anything which is here is low, and if it is most likely and very high consequence, it's extreme. So then it becomes red. Okay, and then you color code that. You put your color code that green is lower level, yellow is middle level, high is little high towards red, and red is the extreme. So now you've created a framework. Now remember, this framework is normally used universally across the world in all projects by all project managers, and almost it is a 5x5 matrix with these kind of names. Okay, low, medium, moderate, high, extreme. This is the risk management framework that everyone uses. Now, so therefore, when we put our 4 risks over there, you will see the COVID will fall under the extreme category. Okay, because we said it was almost certain and the consequences are going to be major. So COVID risk will fall here. Similarly, bad weather, we said it is likely to have a bad weather, but the impact is minor. And I'm saying this is a high risk category, not an extreme risk category. Similarly, the staff is occasionally I might lose staff and the impact is moderate, it'll be high. But the cash flow, again, though it is unlikely, but impact is severe, so it will be very extreme. The rating for the risk related to cash flow is extreme. So therefore, I've just drawn in hand this. So it is nothing but a x and y axis, where x-axis is 1 to 5, y-axis to 1 to 5, and the risk increases from 1 to 25 because there are 5x5 matrix. Okay, so 1 by 1 is 1, which is low, and 5 by 5 is 25, which is very high. So depending on the numbers that you get in this formula, you will be able to categorize your risk rating. What we have learned now, therefore, is how to analyze a risk. Okay, without going through this formula, we do not know in the context of crossing the road in my neighborhood was a low risk or a very high risk. So why do we do that? We do that because when you rate the risk based on the highest rating, you take certain actions. Highest rating, you will take highest actions. Lowest rating, you can ignore or live with it. So that is why we analyze the risk with this rating. And once you do that, then the next slide is about use the action framework. What is the action framework? If it is extreme, then immediate action. You don't wait. It's like your house is on fire. Okay, so there is a fire brigade has to be called for immediate. That risk has to be put down because it's extreme consequences can happen. Okay, but if you see it's high risk, then it is immediately means it may not be immediate right now, but it is as early as possible, ASAP. Okay, similarly, if it is a moderate, then it can be done in due course of time. But if it is a low, then you wait and watch, because any mitigation of the risk, it's like a surgery, it'll cost you money. It's like taking medication, it'll cost you money. So therefore, you want to also manage your budget and costs. So you will say, let's wait and watch. We can live with this problem now, not that essential to immediately solve this, and therefore you will have a strategy or action framework or action strategy based on your risk categorization. So now we have combined the risk analysis with a number, and with the number we have also got a framework what we do with each of the categories. So going back, therefore COVID, immediate action. Everyone should come with masks from tomorrow. COVID has just broken. Everyone should come and do the hand sanitization. Wherever possible, you will have protective shields. So extreme and therefore immediate action needed. For staff leaving and bad weather, we'll take ASAP actions. And anything currently we have got nothing to live with, because all the four risks that we have found, they fall between extreme and high. Okay, so now that we have learned the action framework, the next one, before I go to the next one, I will also tell you which other textbooks don't teach you, is that these developments, those are universal, but still in projects, the project manager can create your own risk rating scale or risk rating template. So this is a 5x5 template which everyone uses, but I thought I'll give you something which is not in the textbook, and I have used in some of my very complex projects a 7-point scale instead of a 5-point scale. In smaller project, I used a 3-point scale, just high, medium, low, 3x3, a box of 9. So how do you do that? Same formula which I've given you. You number them 1 to 5, 1 to 5. Remember, when you are doing risk rating, you can put a 7x7 or 5x7 also. Okay, it's not that you have to have always a square. You could have a rectangle also. That's your planning. After you put the box, then you will have the scale. So here it's a minimum is 1 and 5x5 maximum is 25. And you will see there are boxes here. You can have see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 number is there, but there is no 7 here. Okay, similarly 8, 9, 10 is there, no 11 there. Similarly in 15, 16 is there, but 17, 18, 19 is not there. 20 is there, but 21 to 24 is not there. So you will actually identify the box numbers, and looking at the box numbers, you will categorize the lower part of the box as low. Somewhere in the middle, you will put moderate to medium, and then at the high levels, you will put very high. Okay, so you can actually create your own risk rating table. Now, this is not taught in any textbooks or most of the courses, but I thought I will let you know that you can create your own risk rating scales. So now that we know how to rate risk, now the next one is obviously the treatment. So we need to learn about how to treat the risk, how to, if I have a disease, obviously I need to surgery, or sometimes I just take medication. So how to treat the risk. So the treatment, there are two strategies. The first strategy is called risk treatment or mitigation strategy. Now we need to learn this. These strategies are normally universal strategies. That means you can avoid, your strategy could be, I will avoid the risk altogether or eliminate. What is let's take an example. I am driving up the hills. I'm going from Bagdogra to Darjeeling, and it's a very winding road, and it's a raining, fog, you know. So I might avoid the risk, but by not driving myself, by hiring a car who goes every day and drives every day. So this is called avoidance technique. So you will say, in this case, I will not risk me and my family, and it's called avoidance. The second one could be share or transfer. In the same thing, you might just say that, look, I might just share the driving with me and another friend. Both of us are very good drivers, so I will not get fatigued. I'll drive for only half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I'll transfer the risk to someone else. So that could be one, okay? Share or transfer. If not possible, then one could be reduce or mitigate the risk. So reduce or mitigate the risk could be that, look, I'm not taking my car, I'm not taking a hired car, maybe I'm taking a train. There is a toy train which goes, it's a very safe to travel, because the train, the risk in the toy train to go from Bagdogra to Darjeeling is low. So you have reduced the risk by choosing an alternate. And the last one is that something which cannot be avoided, you to accept the risk. For example, if anyone declares a war against you, you know there's no strategy. I have to face the risk, I have to accept the risk. So this is also called a 4T approach, which is terminate, transfer, treat, or tolerate. Okay, terminate means eliminate, transfer means I transfer. For example, insurance is in a project, you actually insure your project and your people and your equipment. So what you have done is the risk or the impact of the risk of anything happening to the life or injury, you have transferred to the insurance company. You pay a premium, but the risk is transferred to them. Okay. Then treating, we have already talked about how to treat, and then if not, then you accept or tolerate. So what we have learned is also a strategy. It's a very simple strategy, but very powerful strategy of treating the risk. The next strategy is called how to control. Okay, how to control or reduce the risk. So controlling mechanism is simple, where by elimination you can control the risk and its impact, by substitution, by engineering control, by administrative control, or by PPE, which is personal protective equipment. So let's take a quick example. Substitution. Elimination we talked about. Elimination is that, look, it's raining today, I'm not going out. So I eliminated the risk altogether of trip, slip, fall. Okay, it's snowing, there could be landslide in the hills, so I've cancelled or eliminated my trip to the hills. So that is a simple strategy. Substitution could be, I have given example, instead of taking the coach or the car, you have taken the rail. Okay, so you're going from Sydney to Melbourne, or you're going from Bombay to Delhi. So instead of taking a flight where things could go wrong, you're not very sure, you are just taking a train. Okay, so that's a substitution, is one of the controlling strategy. Engineering control means you do something technical to resolve the problem. For example, you have a car which is emitting a lot of pollution, carbon dioxide, it's a risk hazard for everyone. So what you do is you do a technical solution, engineering control, you change the carburetor, change the engine, and make sure that the engineering control is put together. What is the administrative control? That administratively you try to tell people that there is a risk. For example, you go to the supermarket, you will see someone has just mopped the supermarket and there's a lot of wet floors. People can slip, or there may be a coffee spill, you can slip. So someone comes and puts a tape around. Okay, that's an administrative control. Someone puts a signage saying that be careful, it's a wet weather. Okay, someone puts a sign outside the door saying that dog inside, be careful. So these are called administrative risk control, because through some administration, signage, warnings, when you drive, you will see there are signs called slippery road, or wildlife can cross over, reduce the speed. So those signage are called administrative control. And the last one, you can't do anything about it, you protect yourself. For example, you are in a war zone and you are a reporter. Okay, so can you eliminate the war? No. Can you substitute? No. Can you do any control? No matter how much of engineering control you have, air defense system for the missiles, or you have administrative control saying signage, this is the war zone, you don't go there, but you have to go there because you're a reporter. In that case, the only thing you can do is have personal protective gear. So you have a hard hat, you got a hard board, you have some bulletproof jackets. Okay, so that's the last option that you can have. Now, this strategy, you can use any of the strategy for any of the previous examples. In COVID, what will you do? For cash flow, what will you do? Okay, and try and put one of these there. But the thing to learn here is that there is a hierarchy of control. The hierarchy of control says the most effective is the elimination. So if you can avoid the war, nothing like it, no risk. The next is substitute, and after that engineering control, after that is administrative. The least effective is PPE, because here the risk is not mitigated. You are saying the risk continues to be there. I'm trying to protect myself, putting a shield around me. So this hierarchy of control is important to understand. Once we have done that, the last that we need to learn is the monitoring and control of the risk. And the monitoring control of the risk says that you will Chetna, monitor. It says that you need to continuously review the risk or re-review the risk and see whether the risks are getting reduced or not. You're trying to put controls with reducing or not. So therefore, what you'll do is you first apply the controls, the previous controls. I talked about hard hat, or you can have engineering control, or you can have control administrative control. You put this control and see, reevaluate whether the rating has reduced now or not. This is a very, very important step. Okay, without this step, you are not doing the risk management, because you apply the control, it's not over. Then you reevaluate the rating, and then at the end, you accept, if it is acceptable, the residual risks. How do you do that? You go back to the same risk chart where you started with the untreated risk, because you identified COVID or the cash flow risks where they are. Then you apply the controls and see whether after applying the control, the consequences and the likelihood or the probability has reduced or not. If they have reduced, that means the residual risk after applying the control is something which you can accept, and therefore you will see my review process or the re-rating process tells me that after applying the control, I can accept the risk, and that means my risk planning is complete. So let's see in our example. So for example, in our COVID, it was initially extreme. Now you as a project manager have told everyone, please from tomorrow, everyone will come with a mask. Everyone will come and do hand sanitizing. Everyone will ensure that there's a social distancing being made. All these controls you have put here. And then after putting, you say that looks, it has come down to moderate. Okay. Now you might just say, is this enough, moderate? You might just say, no, this is not enough. Then what you do, you add another control. So what is the other control? You can say, no one is allowed to come to the office unless you're double vaccinated. So you put another control. Okay. And then at the end, you see the moderate may have come to low. Once you're satisfied that you can accept a low risk from COVID, you say, my risk planning, risk mitigation is complete. Okay. But if you say, no, I can live with moderate, then obviously, then you will stop at that. So you can see the bad weather from high, it has become moderate. What have you done? Your control could be that I protected my work site with some kind of a protective tarpaulins or something like that. I may have got some pumps. If there are water logging, I will take the water and put it outside. So pumping system has created the risk from high to moderate, because now it becomes insignificant. From minor to it becomes insignificant impact on my project, I can continue. So you can see all of them are from top to bottom, like some from extreme, it has come, cash flow has become low. So essentially what we have learned today is I will accept when extreme and high initial risk ratings has come down to moderate or low. So when it has come to moderate or low and I think I can accept, then my risk management plan is complete. So that completes today's course, and I'll recap what we have learned. So we have learned today the risk management being identify the risk, analyze the risk, treat the risk, monitor and control and improve. We have learned the framework comes from the ISO 31000. We have learned how to identify the risk, how to categorize the risk. Then we have learned the formula and how to apply the formula in all different risks. And then after that, we have learned how to treat each of the risks through the two strategies, the treatment strategies and the control or the reduction strategies. And then we have learned to continuously review and reduce the risk reduction and planning and control and mitigation process so that we can manage risks, any risks. There are 17 categories of risk, from communication to HR to finance to legal, all kind of risks we have actually mitigated. So that completes our today's class. I'll request Irfan to stop the recording and then